Happy day, Vibe Tribe.
I'm the bad witch, I'ma be rich. I'ma be rich. I'm the bad witch, I'ma be rich.
Happy day.
I'ma be rich. I'm the bad witch, I'ma be rich.
So, we are back and Jenny is here. Jenny shall be here. Stiggity. I was listening to one of my most recent recordings, and somewhere in it, like sitting right here, I was mentioning how my medicine, kind of affects my personality. I'm right here, then you shall be here. On YouTube with y'all. The goobers. Stiggity. So, alright, in our most recent episode, I didn't have my medicine. So, I had my morning dose, and I have my afternoon dose. Carbamazine for mood, and Busprin for anxiety. And I had my class today at 12 to 3. Pause the music. Alright. So, I had my class today, and today we were talking about forgiveness. And I was like, you know what? I wrote it down and I was like, today we're going to talk about being on medication and being ourselves and forgiving others, forgiving myself, and rating my mental, my environmental, my emotional, my social, and my physical. So that's something that we shall be rating. And that is something that we shall be talking about. Alright, so I have my Busprin and I have my Carbamazine. And I'm going to put it under my tongue. They say medicine's more fast acting if you put it under your tongue. Sheesh! Alright. And this lighting up here, because it always flecks on my forehead. we shall turn off this lighting up here. Alright. This lighting on. Ooh. Ooh. Spiggity. Alright, so of my medication, and Normally I have my medication with food, so I have an ultimate BLT, I have a fried Oreo, and I have a croissant sandwich. I be dipping in mayo. Stickity, stickity. So, I was talking about today in class, I had mentioned my medicine, and there was someone that had commented on my Facebook and had mentioned, she's like, oh, I'd seen the episode where you were talking about your medicine, and it must have been on my mobile stream because or on my mobile stream or here on Twitch, because we convert our streams to YouTube. Shout out YouTube. And I have goals to be trending on YouTube and trending on Twitch, and that's because I'm used to being trending on the mobile apps, and I feel like it gives people in my community a sense of relief knowing that there is a female from that that lives in the Charlotte area that makes amazing content on multiple platforms. And so I was joking. Well, I wasn't joking. I was actually kind of serious. I was like, I should wipe the smile off my own face and give everyone smiles. Because, that's the lingo from all across the world. People utilize the lingo. They're like, oh, you're smiling. And so whenever I'm in stores and stuff, we all have a tendency on, the Facebook and Instagram age where we're looking at each other's faces. And, something that I pride myself on is, people that I was in middle school with. I was in New York, and elementary school. And I think that, they would be proud of how I have, became a beautiful female and have had I've had the same face since I was, a teenager, on into my adulthood. And, I've worked so hard, making content and streaming, and I've worked 10 times harder than everyone that I am friends with on Facebook. And, even those that make the commercials or the advertisements, they're more new companies, that are, making advertisements and stuff. So I was kind of, studying a little bit of the trend, studying the trends. And that's because, whenever you are a trend and that you're trending in multiple areas of the internet, normally if you have over 1,000 followers, Facebook will, put you on the who to follow list and all that stuff and things. And sometimes they almost utilize your posts as an advertisement. And, I know that I have a lot of people that follow me from my Jenny Beats account, from my Jenny Beats Spotify podcast. and from my Vibe Tribe podcast. And I enjoy to, most of the time, I enjoy to share my personal self because for so many years, I have been sharing my personal self and, I made my personal life kind of online. And then now I'm realizing how my online life and my online persona really do have an effect in the real world. And I think that that is amazing. And, I was mentioning, following, some guidelines, and realizing that these are the guidelines that I have created for myself and for the internet for, commenting purposes, for reactionary purposes, and so on and so forth. I remember whenever I had first, I used to have dimples whenever I was a kid. And then whenever I became a little bit older, I didn't have dimples anymore. It was just, I didn't have dimples, I didn't have any lines, I didn't have any, nasal, I didn't have the nasal, the little nasal bump, and I didn't have smile lines, because for most of the time, for the majority of the time, I would think that, I have what they call a resting bitch face. And, so, my smirks are more of my personality. And I think it's really cool that Amazon made, a smirk their logo. And that is really cool. And so, I'm not sure, alright, I didn't know if you guys knew that Amazon sells fresh produce and they sell microwavable meals. It's amazing. Alright, so I did not stream on the 4th of July. I had an amazing 4th of July and I figured, wear some American pride with, talking about, beginning our stream, talking about smiley faces. Because, whenever I see one online, I feel enthralled. I feel loved. I feel, listened to. I feel cared about. I feel, very, non-doubtful about my surroundings. Because, to be the youngest and realizing, so I started drinking and, smoking weed. Weed is considered a drug, so, nicotine is considered a drug. Caffeine is considered a drug, and these are the things that we have tendencies to become addicted to, just as much as we have tendencies to become addicted to my content, my personality. My content is my personality, and to be of a therapically sound mind, to monetize my personality is probably one of the biggest goals, to practice, goals because I have practiced, because I have gotten to a point where I am forgiving those around me. I'm forgiving those that have, trolled me online. I'm forgiving those, who have hurt my feelings, whether that be family, friends, or my view of myself. And whenever you make content, you are your own friend. And you have to realize that you are many people's friends. And I do believe in hate watching, people that, because if you don't have the practice, if you haven't put in the work, if you haven't placed your skill and ability in a way that you are creating entertainment, not just for yourself, if you love yourself, you can, you automatically share that vibe, with other people. And, whenever people follow you, follow your posts on Twitter or on Facebook. I make more posts on Facebook. I enjoy reading through Twitter and translating, because I feel as though I have a sense of knowing and a sense of oneness with everything that is, that we're working on, and that, that defines America. And, I used to be in the chat rooms, America Online and Yahoo. And whenever I was 13, and, they didn't have streaming back then. And I understand that for most streamers, you have to have multiple hours and multiple, time. And I have more videos than I have subscribers, and I don't think that is a negative thing, because I believe that, I'm finding my niche. It's a mixture between podcasts and gaming and chat reactions. And, I'm gonna swing some TikTok reactions and Facebook reactions. And I think that's a good thing, because unlike the streamers that have found their fame through through sharing content and collaborating, to find that success on your own in a format where, your viewers are your fans and your best friends. They're your fans because they support the skill, and it requires skill. I really do. I believe it requires skill to stream, It's not just a confidence thing, because naturally, you would realize that some of these streamers that are, viral or whatever, they're very shy and reserved. They talk more about other people than themselves. And that's cool and all. Except it doesn't give people things to talk about. If there's a million people watching your stream and you're talking, you're talking about other people, those million people that watched your stream now have nothing to talk about. Whenever you talk about yourself, or act in ways and speak in ways that are, relatable, due to the fact that if you're talking about yourself, you're giving people that enjoy talking about other people something to talk about. Now there's forgiving people. Ask yourself, have you ever forgiven anyone? And if the answer is yes, then you have to ask yourself, have you forgiven yourself? Because, they say resentment is like a fire in your pocket, Resentment is not healthy. Most people that view content are neutral. They're neutral individuals, They're subscribed to multiple people. They watch multiple content. And you have to forgive people. Because sometimes, people will promote to not support. And I think that in the long run, could reflect, negatively in some ways. So, you need to provide people with the right information so that they can figure out how they feel about certain things on their own. I realize that, streaming is almost like talking to all my followers online at once. So, it's good for me to it's good for me to rewatch. It's good for me to, read and study things that would bring me opinions, create my own opinions. There are multiple streamers, big content creators that watch me, and it provides them with the inspiration to to speak about different things. When really, I know that they're referencing me and my content, and that makes me feel good. In the past, it upset me. Now that I'm beginning to forgive and most importantly, forgive myself. Because if I can forgive myself, I won't find the need to be upset with others. I won't find the need to be upset with those that, that reference me, because, I have to think that, I'm these people's friend, with the way that my content is structured. It's structured to kind of feel like I'm talking to you. I'm having a conversation with you. And not just chat. Chat is, a huge part of my content. Chat wouldn't be the same if I didn't have these segments where I'm just talking to y'all. Because most people, they say chat, but really they're speaking to themselves. They're thinking about everything that they watched, rewatched. And whenever you have a friend or someone who has inspired you, who has been trending, maybe you've been trending in a different way, it's smart for you to rewatch and review their content and utilize your opinions on that while you're speaking about, the cost of eggs in Timbuktu. proverbially. So, you know, probably asking yourself, what does the cost of eggs in Timbuktu have to do with your stream? I'm thinking other people's guidelines. You know. So, on another note, I found a love for fried Oreos. Fried Oreo. They're delicious. With some ice cream. So good. They're one of the best desserts that I've had in a while. So, there are people, and there are people who have been streaming consistently on YouTube. They were probably, similar to me at one point where they had more videos than they did subscribers. And while you're making your videos, if you're multi-genre DJ, you're kind of you might realize that you're a multi-genre content creator. I've had content where I was collabing with other people. I've had content where I was talking and having, spiritual talks and stuff. I've had content where I was reading the chat. I've had content where we're listening to music and rapping and making funny comments on the on what we were listening to. So I had my medicine like 30 minutes ago. I feel chill. Well, it seems as though I'm chill. Normally I'm louder, and in some ways, until we have this mic, there's a little bit of a room echo on my side. So, on the 4th, I was sober. I was sober as a judge. And I was around people that were drinking. I would have been drinking. And I wasn't. I have these classes, and today in these classes, we're talking about forgiving others. And, I have to forgive myself for the times that I may have acted out of character, and for the times that, I utilized me acting out of character circumstantially. And I must forgive the people, places, and things circumstantially that had me acting out of character. I wrote a letter to myself where I stated, why I had been, ashamed of myself, and, if I've ever forgave others before, and how that made me feel, because if you don't forgive others, sense of resentment if you don't forgive others. And you have to, if you can forgive others, then you need to learn to forgive yourself. And to forgive yourself, you have to not blame yourself. You have to, kind of rate your mental, your environmental, your spiritual, your social, and your physical, and how you've been, working on that, or how you've been considering those parts of yourself, and and ask yourself different questions today. We made this pie chart about our mental, our environmental, our spiritual, our social, and our physical self. And there was a bunch of different questions. There's like 5 different questions for each, for each one. And they would ask 5 questions about your mental and have you rate and fill in the pie chart. And I was realizing that my mental was a little low, and I would have thought that my mental would have been higher. And then I have to think about, then we were talking about forgiveness, and I was like, I feel like that plays a lot into my mental, because first off, if I'm not forgiving others, how am I forgiving myself? And, I have to forgive myself for acting out of character, because whether or not people, put me into a position circumstantially, for me to forgive them, is for me to forgive myself. For me to forgive myself makes it easier for me to forgive people. And sometimes it's easier to forgive people, and then you hold, you might hold an anger towards yourself. You might also forgive yourself. It works many different ways. And then you have to rate your social. There were 5 different questions, to rate your social. And the way that, it was 25%, 50%, 75%, 100%. If you felt as though something within your social life was 100%, and, here I am saying, again, or I'm mentioning, some people use the word like, and some people say, sometimes to fill in my sentence, I'll say, So